Today, I want to look at two temptations or attacks from Satan in which they're going to be related to men that are serving as bishops or pastor teachers in churches. They're part of the qualifications. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we're looking, jumping off of 2 Timothy chapter 1, that God has not given us a spirit of fear or timidity or cowardice, but a spirit of power, of love, and of a safe frame of mind. And we're seeing that the Spirit empowers us. We've seen that. We've looked at the fact that you need power before you can put on the armor of God, but you have to know what Satan does, because you don't put on the armor of God to deal with a temptation for inappropriate sex or inappropriate sexual thought. You don't put it to deal with argumentativeness. You don't put it on to deal with drunkenness. Those are works of the flesh. You put it on when you're dealing with a satanic attack or a temptation. And we've been looking at some of these over the last few days, because if you don't identify the enemy, then you're not going to know when to put on the armor. And some people think you just have the armor on all the time, and they really don't understand what the armor is, which hopefully when we get to that, we'll be able to explain this in a little bit better detail. So Paul is giving Timothy here in 1 Timothy chapter 3 qualifications for choosing some bishops in either in the church at Ephesus or in the churches around the vicinity of Ephesus. We have both of those situations going on here. Now, bishop sounds like a very fancy word. It's just a butchered English pronunciation of the Greek word episkopos, which, we get an Episcopal church from it, but it means an overseer, one that oversees. And it's the title of the office of a shepherd, which makes sense, because what does a shepherd do? Stands and oversees his flock. It's pretty simple. And so, as Paul's writing Timothy, he says one of the qualifications is not a recent convert, or literally not a new plant. Now, I've grown up lived a good portion of my life, I should say, in agricultural areas, and I've seen this happen a couple of different times where you have farmers that plant a crop, and especially where I live now, this is even more true. And those plants get up just a little ways. They're just coming up, and they're looking good, and then you get a really windy day. And sometimes the wind can be strong enough that can actually snap them off. But sometimes the wind just blows the soil enough that around here, where we have a lot of grit or sandy soil, that it actually can eventually just beat that plant up and cut it off, and it's gone, and they have to replant. Not a new plant. It doesn't have the strength and wherewithal. You go a month later, and that plant's grown up. It's got foliage on it, better foliage, and it's the stem is thicker, and it's more resistant to all the damage of wind and the sand and everything blowing. So not a new convert, not a new plant, because see, there's things that can happen, and what he says is, lest having become conceited. And the word conceited is in the passive voice in the Greek, meaning something else is causing him to be conceited. Namely, that the church has said, hey, we're going to put you in this position. We're going to give you this elevated position, even though you're not tried and tested yet. And we're going to put you in there. And so somebody else has kind of created this. And this is what Paul's warning Timothy. Don't put those new plants in there. He says, conceited, and he fall into the judgment of the devil. And I would take this to be the kind of judgment that the devil fell into. That if you go back to the Old Testament, you go to Isaiah 14, go to Ezekiel 28, you find that there was this shining one that God had created, this one that was a cherub, and he was in God's garden, and he looked at himself and said, compared to everything else, he was beautiful. And it went to his head. And in going to his head, he determined, guess what? He said, I am greater than all of this stuff. In fact, I'm so great that I think I could be like the Most High. I could be like him. I could move my throne up there. And so he came under judgment. Condemnation is the word krima here. Well, it's just krima, judgment, pardon me. Not condemnation, but under the judgment of the devil. But it's possible, he says, for this man to be conceited and actually think he's greater than he actually is. Can go to a person's head. And I don't think anybody's immune to this. I've been pastoring for 30 years, And I'm still in danger sometimes of this idea of being conceited and thinking, oh, these people are so lucky to have me. They would never find anybody else as great as me. Then you have to come back and go, oh, that's so foolish to think that way. I know God could use a lot of different people and do this. And I'm not the cat's meow or whatever, however you want to describe it. Anyway, move on to verse 7. And it says, and it is also necessary for an overseer they've added it here to clarify from verse 1, to have a good reputation or testimony from those on the outside. In other words, men that serve, we say they serve as pastors, and it's the way we use it. That's describing their gift, but they're actually serving in the office of overseer or bishop. And in a community, if you're going to bring somebody in there, you want to make sure that that person doesn't have a reputation for the fact that they don't pay their bills, that they are just really horribly rude to people all over town, that they're that guy that just works everybody down to the absolute cheapest price, and just doesn't know how to give. They always want to walk away with absolutely the best deal, which we all get that, but you could do all of these kind of things to the point that you become annoying and you have a bad testimony in your community. Excuse me. And he says you need to really be concerned about what the neighbors think, what the other people think in general, that you ought not to have a poor reputation. He says, because if that is the case, if they fall into that, or if they don't, then they can fall into reproach. Now, the word reproach is a Greek term that means translates a Greek term that means to ridicule, to insult with severity. It's not just a little bit of disgust. It's like a real harsh treatment. In fact, the word is used of the way people spoke and talked to Jesus and treated him while he was on the cross. Nobody's beating him anymore. It's talking about the insults and such that were hurled at him. And it says, lest he fall into that reproach, which then he says is the snare of the devil. And I believe then that this snare of the devil is that the devil gets them ensnared, that they spend an inordinate amount of time trying to reclaim that reputation that they could have had, trying to reclaim that witness or that testimony they could have had if they would have just treated other people the way they should have in the first place. If they would have just been paid their bills, and they would have been nice to their neighbors and nice to the other people, and just being kind would have been a lot better than trying to reclaim this after they have treated other people with such harshness, or whatever is the cause of lack of reputation in the town. And then you spend all the time. And so Satan gets them ensnared, and they just keep going around in circles trying to get free. And it doesn't happen. When I was about 6 years old, I was with my dad, and we were out on a hillside, and there was an animal caught in a snare, and that animal had going round and round in circles with that snare, had cut a hole about big enough to drop a small tractor tire in. The hole was about that deep, probably about that deep, but that big around. I still remember that very vividly. Trying to get free. And this is what he said. This is what will happen. You'll just waste all of your time. So you don't want to do that. So you want somebody that has a good reputation. Because Satan up here fell under judgment from being conceited. And in the same token where this is a matter of pride, this becomes a matter of pride too, where Satan is going to get them caught in pride, trying to regain that reputation. Because it's a matter of pride. They want people to like them. They want people to respect them. And it should be, as far as is possible. But if you have to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to make that happen, then you're going to end up neglecting the things that God wants you to do. And then that becomes a whole other part of a satanic temptation, namely that you're lazy in the spiritual things, busy about the wrong things. And there's lots of us as believers that have struggled with that at one time or another. Now, the reason we're going through these is because you need to identify how Satan attacks. If you don't know the temptations that come from Satan, if you don't know what those are, as we say, they're not They're not temptations to sex, particularly. They're not temptations to be argumentative. They're not temptations for greed. They're not temptations for drunkenness. Those are things that Paul delineates as works of the flesh in Galatians 5. Attacks from Satan are being puffed up. I'm somebody important. Or just chasing around a snare again and again, trying to fix something. And if you don't understand how Satan attacks, then you won't know when to put on the armor of God. And that is the only way that you're ever going to escape from a satanic temptation, is to put on the armor. And before you can put on the armor, you need to be strong in the Lord. You need strength, and that strength comes from the ministry of the Spirit. And when you do, you can put on the armor, you can resist the devil, and then he flees, which makes it possible for us then to have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me today.